Welcome to a special edition of Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin. We are coming from Rigel Studios here in Las Vegas. My main man, attorney Don Green, and I have been discussing some of the minute-to-minute changes that are going on in the cases of the virus interfering with the election, the case of the virus interfering with concealed carry permits, the new rulings from several courts as to what's going on and who's honoring permits and who isn't, and so forth and so on. This stuff is happening minute by minute. So we decided, Don decided, and I certainly went along with it, to do a special edition dealing with some of those issues. So I'm going to turn it over to Don Green to start out. We've got a litany of problems we're discussing here.
That is correct. And again, thank you. My name is Don Green, and you know Bob and I from the Fired Up with Bob Irwin shows, and also from the various gun shows. So we decided to bring the gun shows to you of several of the questions which we would be presented and some of the answers. May we have the first slide, please? We'll let the audience watch this for a moment. This is the incident in St. Louis involving the family, the husband and wife known as McCloskey. We'll have some comments on this in just a moment. And these are the agitators who broke into what I believe to be a gated community, exclusive housing, in a private street, and private citizens who are defending their property. And these people broke into the gates. They were not invited in there. This is a very curious situation. Now, here's our take on this. Bob and I discussed this in a previous show. But if we can have the next slide, and then I'll have some comment. I'll ask some questions of Bob. If we could have the next slide, please. Last week, the Attorney General of the state of Missouri filed a court paper, that is Mr. Eric Schmidt, filed a court paper requesting the circuit court in St. Louis to dismiss the firearms and brandishing of weapons charges lodged against the McCloskeys by a St. Louis County prosecutor. And in the court papers which he filed, he states, self-defense is the central component of the right to keep and bear arms, which receives the highest level of protection from the Missouri Constitution. This prosecution sends a powerful message to all Missourians that they exercise the fundamental right to self-defense at their own peril. Missourians should not fear exposure to criminal prosecution when they use firearms to defend themselves and their homes from threatening intruders. Public policy dictates that this prosecution should not proceed. The court should dismiss this case at the earliest possible opportunity, end quote. Now, Bob, you're in a different location today, and we're managing this broadcast to be compliant with the governor's COVID-19 regulations and orders. Bob, why is it that we even have this prosecution, in your professional opinion?
Well, it makes no sense. It appears to be politically driven. When you look at the videotapes and even the bystanders tapes and so on, it is pretty clear that these guys crashed through the gate of the community. This guy's house happens to be the one right in the middle, which is in the gate, I guess, is in the center of the community, but they crashed through right in front of his house, and these people pour through the gate, and literally, when you look at other camera angles, there were many, many of them. They're shouting, they're yelling, I'm going to kill your dog, I'm going to, poop in your toilet, I'm going to do that and the other thing. And making it clear that their lives and their property are in danger. For them to, under every law for human right we believe in, to come out of the house rather than shoot through the windows. They came out to show these guys they were armed. And normally, with sensible people, that is an incredible deterrent, and the bad guy goes away. But this is not a conventional bad guy. This is a mob being encouraged by each other to keep this attack going.
Bob, in Nevada, we have a constitutional right to defend oneself, and we have statutory right to defense, and the statute is very, very clear on what the elements of what we should look at when it comes to the self-defense and that threat of immediate great bodily injury or death.
Yep.
Now here we have a mob. Can the mob itself, can we argue in court here in Las Vegas, here in Nevada, can we argue that the mob is a deadly weapon, or that it is a threat of great bodily injury by the size of the mob?
Certainly. You know, we always look at that in court cases of self-defense. Was there one bad guy or 17 bad guys? In this case, we've got 40 or 50 bad guys in all probability. Is it reasonable for him to believe that he's in danger, or his wife's in danger, his dog's in danger of serious bodily injury or death? Absolutely. Anybody looking at this from his perspective would have taken precisely the same action. They had already called 911, they did all that stuff, and ultimately they were able to hire private security, I understand, but their actions were blatantly reasonable, if that's a legal term, blatantly reasonable.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And in Nevada, I mean, I've been telling people who've been calling me, can I defend myself like those people did in St. Louis? And I said, it depends. Every situation is going to be different. Are they knocking on the door? They're asking for donations. And suppose you live in a 55 and older community. They know that you're vulnerable. Or are you in a modest community somewhere, let's say off of Eastern and Desert Inn, in a middle class neighborhood, not in a gated community, not in a 55 or older? Everything is going to be dependent on that particular situation. And if they're peacefully protesting, they've got a permit. When does that become a great? Let me ask you this, Bob. When these people leave the main street, let's say they leave the Las Vegas Strip, then they cross the freeway on or Flamingo, going towards the Rio, and then they march into those neighborhoods there. Does the mob now transcend from peaceful protest to a mob which is going into neighborhoods? And is that a defense?
Yeah, well, the first thing you'd look at is, when did they suddenly come onto private property where they don't have a right to demonstrate or anything else, or to be on without permission? And once the person in charge of that property says, get off my lawn, they are clearly in violation of the trespassing statutes. And if there's enough of them and they're threatening, which these people obviously were threatening, the pointing of the firearms was, again, entirely reasonable.
Thank you. Can we have the slide with the Walmart, the people at Walmart wearing the Nazi face masks? We're looking at a slide at a YouTube or some kind of a video where these people were wearing what appears to be swastikas on either face masks or bandanas. Now, this is it could be political speech. I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that strippers and the act of stripping is a form of speech, peaceful protest or silence. So we have a situation here. We have a private business, Walmart, and these people are in Walmart. Let's take it, forget about Walmart right now. Let's take it from the citizen who's watching this. Bob, can the citizen accost these people by drawing a firearm simply because they are wearing these face masks with the swastika?
Absolutely not.
Why?
Because there's no threat to their life. They're not being endangered of injury or death. There's no threat of physical harm. Now, what these folks are doing is incredibly stupid and in incredibly poor taste, but has nothing to do with self-defense issues. Absolutely nothing. They are stupid idiots. They should be punished in some manner, I would think, disturbing the peace or whatever. They're clearly doing that. But with free speech rights, I guess that's their free speech. You can be stupid and have free speech. But again, they're on private property. If Walmart chooses to have them leave, they can certainly do that because they're creating a disruption in the store.
And Bob, one of the first things that you teach, and for the last, I'm not going to say 100 years, but since the last century, because that's how long ago I've known you, it's true. Bob, one of the things is you avoid the conflict. For our viewers, the exercise here in looking at these people wearing these Nazi face masks is that if you're carrying a concealed weapon and you're wearing a swastika for a face mask and you draw your weapon, let's look at it from a legal point in the courtroom. Tell me what you think the prosecution is going to argue, or the prosecution expert is going to argue on the issue of no self-defense.
If who draws the firearm? The
Nazi person with the Nazi face mask draws his firearm when somebody approaches him.
The Nazi face mask doesn't really matter. It makes him look like a fool in front of the jury. But he's pointing a gun in a threatening manner. That's a clear danger. And the victim that he's pointing the gun at can take whatever action to defend himself. We recommend leaving, obviously. But it's a self-defense situation which has nothing to do with the mask. The mask simply shows the guy's attitude. It's like a gangster with teardrop tattoos, which mean different things to different gangs, but it indicates, that he killed somebody in most cases. So he's got on his face something that says, "I'm a murderer," and some of them actually have that tattooed on their face. Does that influence the decision of his victim to feel his life's in danger? Yes, it does.
Let's change the mask. I'm wearing a Washington Redskins face mask in Walmart. Is it a different result?
Yes. Has
Why?
Nothing to do with a threat. We have some long history of poor football play, but we don't have a history of the Washington Redskins being aggressive. Now, if you're a Native American, and then you say, well, they're wearing something that's demeaning to me as a person because I'm, a Native American, and that's awful, that still is a free speech thing. It has nothing to do with self-defense.
But Bob, would you agree that for the concealed weapon carrier in Nevada and California, and if you're going to carry concealed and wear the face mask, would it be your advice to have someone wear or tell someone to wear a neutral face mask, at most camouflage or something which without any color on it, without any political statements which could incite a particular situation which is going to force a conflict?
Yeah, I would. I think that wearing a face mask that shows your political views, particularly in this environment that we're in now with the divided country and so forth, is a way of getting into fights. It's like having a bumper sticker that says, I don't break for dogs, I run over them. Well, is that going to make people throw rocks at your car? Sure.
Yes.
It's free speech, but it's dumb to do that. We need to wake up and keep our opinions to ourselves. If you would like to do that, go on the internet like everybody else and say all the stupid stuff you want to say. But these are not firearm situations. Well, that's it for that.
May we have the next slide, please? Again, in connection with our our continuing duty to inform people of what's going on at gun shows, we want to present our audience and our listeners with something which, this is the number of active concealed weapon permits issued in the state of Nevada by sheriffs. And this is as of July 1st, 2020. It's usually updated every year, and we have a total in Nevada of 132,299 active concealed weapon permits issued in the state of Nevada. Bob, can you update our audience on anything that's coming up with what they're doing at the CCW detail at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department?
Yeah, what they're doing now basically is they're on the same system they were on before all this virus stuff started. They're a little short-handed because of officers being ill, or people taking time off because they're ill or their family's ill and whatnot. So they're a little on short staff, but they basically are running the same program they have always run. The difference is you must start through the system online. You go online to Metro's website, there's a click there for concealed carry, and fill out the application to get the permit or application to renew the permit. They will then, it doesn't really explain it very well on the site, but the result is after you fill that in, you will get the next page which says, make an appointment. These are what we have available. If you just walk in, you're going to have to wait a long time because we take appointments first. So they'll give you, they'll start 4 or 5 days ahead of or behind the date you're coming in. And then you can book an appointment. And then at that time, you can walk in the door with your filled out application because you've already filled it out online. They have all the information and they'll whisk you right through. It is, if you've already been fingerprinted by Metro on the electronic prints, it's even faster. When you go to renew it, you're in there in a matter of minutes, literally. I renewed mine and it was I was inside the door like 6 minutes. There's nothing to it. They're full on doing it as they normally would under much worse circumstances. They are on occasion, because of the short staffing, getting beyond that 120 days. And they're getting up toward it as the ebbs and flows of the paperwork catch-up goes. Most of them are issuing within 90 days. If they have trouble with a background check because Anchorage, Alaska isn't responding to their request and so forth. If you have lived in 1,400 different places, especially foreign countries, and it's your first time and they haven't run your background, it will take a long time. We're all running on short speed here because of the virus. I'm still on house arrest, of course, but they're doing the best they can. Calling up and screaming at the clerk on the phone is not going to do any good. He already knows they're not fulfilling their obligation. They're beyond the days they're supposed to be. They're doing the best they can. They really are.
Yes, they are.
Put up with it, please.
Okay. May we have the next slide, please? Again, this is something we would be presenting at the gun shows. This is the new Nevada reciprocity listing issued by the Nevada Department of Public Safety. And for those of you who are either new to Nevada or new to the world of CCWs, please recall that in June of 2015, then Governor Sandoval made a law in effect that it changed everything about CCWs, and specifically Senate Bill 175 and Assembly Bill 488, which are still in effect, mandated that the Nevada Department of Public Safety must review and revise the Nevada concealed weapon reciprocity every year. And in this year, in June of 2020, when this is becoming effective, there's a new listing. And for all of you who would like to have one of these cards, they're being printed right now. The printer was down because of COVID-19, but we're having these printed with my business card information on the back. And if you call my office at 702-409-8888, 8239. Leave us your address. We'll be able to send you a card free of charge. And you just carry it around with you. It's the size of about the size of a baseball card. But in any event, significantly for 2020, and Bob will have some comments on this in a moment, there were last year and for the years 2018, 2017, and 2019, 30 states were recognized by Nevada. For the 2020 legislature, it is now 27. And removed from the former list are the states of Nebraska, North Carolina, and Oregon, which were formerly in our previous edition, our previous reciprocity statute. Bob, do you have any comments on why these states may have been taken out? Because the legislative history in a democratically controlled assembly and senate is very sparse.
Yeah, my best guess, and I'm pretty sure it's correct, is the training standards that we specify. Our statute says something to the effect of we recognize states that have similar training and similar background checks, or some wording to that effect. And I would suspect that it's states where they quit doing background checks, or they're showing a lot of failures of background checks. In other words, they run the checks, but people get by and they show up here with their permit and they're a felon, and the background check missed that. It's either that their training doesn't match ours, or their background checks don't match ours. And either one of those is a kind of a valid reason. I don't think we want people without any training, or certainly we don't want people to fail the background checks, to be carrying firearms in Nevada. Now, there's the issue there. Let me get down even to the more nitty-gritty. If the guy is not a criminal, it isn't a failure of the background check, he has a right to keep and bear arms, in my opinion. I'm a believer in constitutional carry, that if there is no reason to prohibit you from having a firearm, such as your criminal history. You should be able to carry one concealed if you want to. It's your right. So, kind of a bifurcated response, where we have the police department not issuing them because of the failure of the background checks. That's a good thing. When we have them not issuing because we don't like their training, that's a separate issue. We obviously encourage everybody to get training. In all the people I've taught classes, a class of 30 or 40, in most cases there would always be at least one, sometimes two people, who when you talk to them and ask them questions about what they learned in the class and so forth, you realize they shouldn't be carrying a gun. You know, I'm just keeping my gun because goddamn my neighbor's pissing me off, and now I'll have a permit so I can shoot him if I want to.
Bob,
I've heard that, and you go, no, I'm not going to sign your permit. Watch this, and here we go.
Bob, when you mentioned a minute ago about, you're a believer in constitutional carry, you're not advocating for our audience that someone who's had some mental instability issues or some serious criminal matters should carry a firearm. You're not advocating that?
Absolutely
okay.
not. No, if they're not mentally competent, which is... Boy, you think there's a subject that puts you in the weeds there, folks? What is mentally competent and what ain't?
That's right. May we have the next slide, please? Because I'm licensed in California, and Bob and I are at the gun shows, and we get a number of people from California who come here and try to buy weapons and whatever. We're providing this to some of our California listeners, and we came across a very interesting point here from the other day, and this is that the Los Angeles County Sheriff, who's always in trouble on one end or the other when it comes to firearms, whether he's going to enforce the regulations, whether he's not, well, he's going to increase the number of carry permits in California. Remember, it's the sheriff's discretion, by 400%. Now, we're going to have some statistics in a minute on some other states, but Bob, why all of a sudden do you see this dramatic increase by 400% in a state like California?
Well, I can see that he's getting applications from lots and lots of people because the crime rate's going through the roof, and I'm a little wary of that statement that he's increasing them by 400%. meaning that only one person had a permit before, and now 4 people have permits. Therefore, it's an increase of 400%, which is statistically true. I wish that was on real numbers so we could see what he's
Bob, you're probably about right.
It's a political statement, and the guy is generally on gun laws. He's been a jerk, and he doesn't approve of the right of people to defend themselves. Maybe he's having second thoughts. Is he up for election?
I don't know yet, but let's go to the next slide on that point. Let's go to the next slide. Now we see in Illinois that there's a 500% increase in the number of people applying for concealed weapon permits in the state of Illinois. Bob, again, with some of your astute observations, what can you tell this about our audience in general?
Well, this one actually, the entire story on this one had some numbers attached to it. And there are lots of numbers that show they're increasing their issuance of carry permits a lot. They've been flooded with people that want to get permits because the crime rate in Chicago particularly has gone through the roof. And if you watch anybody's newscast, you can tell that we're having lots and lots of murders and break-ins and rapes and so forth going on in certain areas of the Midwest. And Chicago is the murder capital of the world. I think Baltimore is trying to catch up or something, but so far they're on the top of the heap over 10-year averages. So people are buying guns in huge numbers when they can find them, and of course then they want to be able to carry it concealed, because the gun you left in your house doesn't do you any good when you're out shopping. So they have had a huge increase in applications for permits, and they're issuing lots more permits than they were.
May we have the next slide? So now we go next door to the next state in Indiana. And we just found out the other day, one of my contacts back east said, Donald, you may be interested in this particular statistic, and that is, or this particular point, and that is the Hoosier State is now not going to charge fees for concealed weapon permits in Indiana. Comments, Bob?
Well, that's good. They shouldn't. It's a constitutional right to keep and bear arms, and there shouldn't be a fee from the government for that. If they do background checks and so forth, I understand that. You know, they got to do background checks, and it takes time and officers and researchers to look at things. But it should be free. Certainly a minimum fee, you know, of $50 or something for the officer's time to actually do it, if they figure out what that is. Where in some states, New Jersey, New York, they're charging several $1,000s, and you basically have to get an attorney file for you, and it takes 2 years, you know, so forth, to get a permit. The cost of it should be free philosophically. A small fee is reasonable, I think, to do that.
But Indiana's not going to charge a fee, but they still charge fees for a driver's license. What's the rationale?
Well, because the Third Amendment doesn't say you have a right to drive a car.
So
it is not a constitutional right to drive a car. And some of them are arguing that. Now they say because immigrants can't get to work, they shouldn't have to have a driver's license and so on. You hear that all going on too. But it isn't protected by the Constitution. I guess it is in certain jurisdictions. The horse and buggies are exempted, but you don't have it's not a constitutional issue.
May we have the next slide, please? Bob, on the screen we have here, we have that there's it appears as if there's an influx of ordinances through several counties across the United States, which are looking at creating sanctuary counties or sanctuary cities for those owning firearms. And we can see on here that there are a number of states here, and some of them don't. You already have like for example, Vermont, which you don't have to have a permit to carry a firearm as long as you're eligible to carry it, or like in Alaska. Bob, what are your comments on these sanctuary counties where they're going to protect the right to keep and bear arms? From your perspective of your years of experience.
I think it's a great idea. You do have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. That's what the Constitution says, and the Constitution applies to all the states. So it seems there should be constitutional carry throughout the United States. As a separate issue, we've had this edict coming from some of our brothers that are on the pro-gun side that every state should honor everybody else's permit. I think that's going to come back to bite us. Mm-hmm. Every state, we certainly should just have constitutional carry, unless you're doing something wrong, or you're illegal, or you're a criminal, etc. Unless there's a prohibiting factor there that makes sense, then you have a right to keep and bear arms. That's it. And the sheriffs that are fighting this are simply saying, you know, a lot of them are, you're passing a ban that you can't have more than 7 rounds in a magazine, or 10 rounds in a magazine, or more than 20 rounds in your detachable magazine rifle, or whatever their particular wording is. And whatever wording I make up, there's a state that actually does that. They're not going to spend their time counting cartridges in somebody's magazine or arresting them because they see they're carrying a gun. And they're going to stop them and search them and count the rounds in the magazine. So they simply ain't going to do it. The answer is, I've got real police work to do. If the guy's not obviously shooting at somebody, I'm not going to mess with him. I'm going to let him go on and live like a free person.
May we have the next slide? Bob, just in the last several months, according to the National Rifle Association, we've got some 2 million people just this year who are now first-time gun owners. Now, when I have talked to several federal firearms licensees over the past week, and most recently this past Saturday and Sunday, they are seeing an increase in the number of first-time buyers and a dramatic increase of first-time buyers, females. And I'm not trying to be sexist, but single females, because almost every one of the calls I received last week were from women. They said, would you please give me a call? I call them back. Mr. Green, my name is Mary, and I'm a single female, and I want to buy a firearm, but they told me that because of something which happened in California, I need to call you. And it was almost 100% last week. And this is what the federal firearms licensees are advising me, is that they're seeing a lot of first-time buyers and females. Bob, observations?
Well, that is true, and that all has direct relation to the crime rate, which has direct relation to the rioting and the letting criminals out of jail because they got the virus, or they might get the virus when they're in jail. So we want to let them out so they can transmit the virus to the rest of the population. Does that make sense to anybody watching this thing? Anyway, there are first-time buyers directly related to the crime rate. They want to get a gun. And that was the initial thing that I started doing at the gun store well, I actually started before that when I had the survival store on the other side of town. But we gave the classes for free. And consequently, I dug up a number one time that I taught personally, over 30,000 concealed weapon holders. And that is driven by the crime rate. It's not driven by anything else but lackadaisical law enforcement, or now, because the cops are being theoretically thrown out of cities and this and that, or disbanded, or defunded, so they don't have their plainclothes cops to chase bad guys with. Crime rate is way higher, burglaries are higher, home invasions are spiking. It is just ludicrous what's going on with the crime rate. Thank you mostly to the Democrats in office in various cities and counties. But I'm sure there's probably a Republican in there somewhere but it's mostly Democrats. And it's created this absolute panic buying. There needs to be a reduction in crime by active law enforcement, putting people in jail and keeping them there. Then this rush will be off.
Well, as a criminal defense attorney, you know, I try to get people out of jail, but as someone involved in the system when it comes to the legal purchase and carrying of firearms, there have to be limits, and this is what I tell people: there have to be limits, and there are limits. And then we hear from people that say, well, there's a hierarchy in the first 10 amendments. There is no hierarchy in the first 10 amendments. The fact that free speech and freedom of religion and freedom of expression is the First Amendment is merely because that's how it turned out to be when the first 10 amendments were enacted. And a lot of people don't realize, and there are lawyers out there who do not realize, that at the beginning of the Bill of Rights, these 10 amendments is a statement, a preamble, which the founders stated, and a lot of people don't realize this, that is a check on government. And that's exactly what it is. So the fact that it's the First Amendment, it is, and I saw this on MSNBC the other night, and I just about choked when they said that the First Amendment is the primary amendment. That is not true. They have equal footing, even though they might not be litigated, but they have equal footing. May we have the next slide, please? Okay. Now we have a slide here we're talking about a number of states which are enacting these red flag laws, but then we have an increase in the number of people who are applying for firearms and getting firearms. Bob, again, if you can just briefly tell us again that this red flag laws, what do you think is going to happen with these?
Well, it's already happening. It's creating a bit of a mess in how it's applied and how the defendant, the victim of the flagging, is able to defend himself. The red flag laws say that, you know, if a neighbor or your wife or your cousin who lives in another state, or a blood relative or by marriage relative, it depends on what state you're in, or just someone who knows you really well, calls the police and says, you know, I'm really afraid that Don over here, you know, he's been an attorney a long time and he's kind of losing it like most attorneys. And I'm afraid, you know, he's got a lot of guns, and I know he has more than 10 guns, and he didn't need to have an arsenal. So you need to go over there and knock on his door and check him out. Well, that's no basis to go over there and check him out. He's not committing a crime. So the red flag laws, I think are more harm than good. There are people who need to have mental help, but we have generally, and anybody can cite cases that are in violation of what I'm saying, but you have to actually commit a crime before, or be suspected of an actual crime before the police come over and jack you up. That's not the way America presumes you're innocent. Aren't your clients presumed to be innocent, Don?
Yes, and one of the things that you and I talked about last year at gun shows, when people were saying, well, what's going to happen with red flag laws? It's going to be a nightmare. And one of the points that I made is, yes, there are going to be abuses, especially in domestic relations cases, the angry wife, the angry husband, the angry girlfriend, whatever. But I told them that we have to believe in our justice system. And I said that one of the major problems that somebody was arguing, an attorney was arguing, was the enforcement of these red flag laws. But I have seen, and I've been a lawyer 37 years, Nevada has 16 counties, and one it's called Carson City. It's its own entity. It has its own, it's the capital of Nevada. So like Washington, D.C., it has its own court system. But in the 16 counties and in Carson City, I practice law in every single one of them. And I have, and my buddies have told me from what they're gathering and their information, is that this law, the red flag law, by the judge's perspective, is being applied somewhat equally and uniformly, because our legislature, although they created this law, they made a mixture of this law from California and some other legislatures in other states. But in Nevada, our judges are looking at these things very carefully. And there's no divergence, for example, in Lander County, in Esmeralda County, in Story County, and Clark County, and Lincoln County, and Carson City. They're all very much uniform. So that's a tribute not only to the clarity of our red flag law, but a clarity to our jurists who are sitting there as reasonable men and women looking at these issues. May we have the next slide, please? Okay. Bob, just last week, the Calvary Chapel Dayton Valley Church filed a lawsuit, and then they ended up at the U.S. Supreme Court last week, which denied an injunction. It was a 5-4 denial. It was not a written decision. It is just that 5 judges decided on this emergency basis that it was not worth to decide. Yet we have other religious-based cases decided by the U.S. Supreme Court this year where they did agree. Now, in the Nevada case, these people actually consulted with me before they filed the lawsuit. And I told them, you know, this is my point. It's not an issue of freedom of religion. It's the peaceably assembled portion of the First Amendment, because they're issuing licenses for hundreds of people to protest, and casinos are allowed to be bringing in hundreds of people every day. Movie theaters can have 500 people in there as long as they're social distancing, but if you're a church, you can't have more than 50.
Oh, wait a minute. SISOLAK closed the movie theaters again
Okay.
day before yesterday.
Excuse me, then that's why this show is very timely. What is today's date? The 29th?
Yep, he closed them 2 days ago.
Yes, then I stand corrected on that point. He closed them the other day. But the thing is that at the time of this decision, casinos could have more than 50 people as long as there was social distancing. The swimming pools here are packed. I drive by a swimming pool to see one of my legal assistants, my daughter, 3 times a week, because we're practicing social distancing in my office. And there's this huge water park, and there are hundreds of cars in the parking lot, and there are thousands of swimmers probably in the pools, and not one of them's got a mask. So, Bob, the question is this. We talked about this last year when there was the shooting in Texas. Now, what's going to happen when one of these people violates the law and brings in a firearm and shoots somebody? Are they going to be able to defend on, like, freedom of religion and that this law is not right?
Has nothing to do with the threat, again. I don't know. You know, we have the nutcases who see that, and if your loved one catches the virus and dies because of some fool not social distancing, and you can actually determine with evidence that he's the one that transmitted the disease, which I don't think we're capable of now, although there are some minor differences in the virus. Who caused it to get to who, everybody just needs to back off. This thing will be over ultimately. Lots of good news today about virus tests and scans and so forth that seem to be working. And I think we'll have it beat if we can hang on for another month, 2 or 3. And then we will try and get the economy back to normal, and we'll all be back working again.
Bob, final point. I got a call yesterday afternoon. The client says, I just put on my mask. In the act of putting on a mask, a patron in the store, I'm not going to name the store, grabbed me and said, you don't have a mask and you're not socially distancing with the woman you're standing next to. Bob, can I draw my firearm when she grabs my arm?
Of course not. That is incredibly stupid. You don't intervene physically and get in someone else's space when there is not a threat to your life. You back off and walk away, go outside, call 911 and say, somebody just touched me on the arm. I want a police squad to come down and arrest the guy. And just wait. Might have to wait a while, but a policeman will eventually come and arrest the person for touching you. Time to back off, calm down. This will end someday, and we'll be back to normal. Going after somebody because they're touching your arm, ridiculous.
I want to thank you, Bob, and the hard work that you put into this, and I especially want to thank Rigel Studios for accommodating us. Again, we've come up with this plan over the past several months of we're bringing the gun show to you. That is, we're bringing the information which we would ordinarily provide at the gun show and in some of the broadcasts on the American Guns and Glory Network. So we want to thank your listeners and your viewers, and thank you again, Bob.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. And we'll be back next week with another edition of Fired Up on Thursday around 5 o'clock. And thank you for watching this. We appreciate the support. We're looking at the wrong camera. Appreciate the support. And we'll be back next week.